Welcome back to another episode of the Packs That She Said podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Maggie Loney, joined as always by Perry Goldstein. And this week we thought we would kind of dip our toes into draft content, talk about maybe some first round prospects that we'd like for the Packers or what we see them doing, if we think they'll stay put at 25, if we see them trading up, if we see them trading back. And then we also wanted to touch on some quick comments from the NFL annual meeting that took place earlier this week. Mark Murphy, Brian Gutekunst, and Matt LaFleur were all there, gave interviews to the press. So, first of all, Perry, how are you?
I'm good. Doing well. Full swing off season. Just we're gearing up for the draft now, huh? 1 month out.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where I want to start this conversation about the annual owners meeting, because I see some comments on Twitter, right, about don't believe anything that Brian Gutekunst says, which I think is probably the correct thing, right? Like, he's thinking that they're set at offensive line. He's talking about how their cornerback room is deep, which it is, but I do still think there's a world where they take an offensive lineman early or a cornerback early, right? And he had high praise for Isaiah McDuffie. And I also in the past have had high praise for Isaiah McDuffie. I like his role on the team. Those things said, I'm not sure he's your ILB2 for an every down kind of position. So just, I mean, like, did you have anything that you heard that you thought warranted some discussion or maybe some takeaways from their meetings? Or do you think it was more just coach and or president and or GM speak?
Yeah. Nothing that like particularly stood out to me. I think we loved hearing that, they're starting on talks for Jordan Love's contract extension.
Yep.
I think we all expected that to happen, obviously. But it's good to know that that's like officially happening. I feel like it's a lot of coach GM speak at this point. I think, of course, Brian feels good about where his roster is at this point in the season, because he should.
Mm-hmm.
He should feel good. I mean, if you listen to our last episode, we did red light, green light. We feel good about where it's at, and I think they probably, when you do the evaluation, and then I think when you look into how much draft capital they have, it's hard not to feel as a GM confident that you're going to plug in those holes. So I would prefer, honestly, as a GM, if he, was out there praising his roster at the current moment than saying
Right.
like, oh yeah, we need an inside linebacker, and oh yeah, we need offensive line competition, because that's not great. So I think it was kind of exactly what he should be saying at this point.
Yeah, I also thought it was really interesting to hear that. I don't know if you could say let it slip, but Mark Murphy kind of confirmed that it was between the Packers and the Browns to open the season in Brazil week 1 against the Eagles. That was really interesting. I know that Packers Brazil is just really hoping that the Packers get down there. So we'll have to see. It sounds like it'll be in the next like week or so that we'll find out.
Is
Week
it
1 I
bad
thought was
that I'm not really not on board with I love our international fans. I want them, like, theoretically to see games, like, as a fan. But when it comes to the players and that travel day to start the season, it makes me nervous for them.
I'm surprised it's week 1. That's what I was gonna say is I think it would be very cool, maybe like week 7 and then your bye is like week 8 or something, or if you have a bye somewhere around your international games, like those kinds of scheduling make sense to me, but week 1 is very crazy, especially since we know the Packers haven't started week 1 at home in like 3 straight seasons. So then if you're talking about a 4th season of them going away, like I would be on board with it just because I think it's really cool, but yeah, it seems kinda like a shock for week 1, but I think that's how the NFL wants it to be, right? Like, start the
Yeah.
season with a bang. So, I guess I understand the logic, but I definitely wish it
Mhm.
was built into, like, a bye week.
Yeah. The only other thing that I'd touch on is that, I think it's pretty obvious how excited Matt LaFleur is to have Josh Jacobs on the
Yeah.
team. He seemed like he has a lot of thoughts and unique ways that he would like to use him, not just obviously as a running back, but in the pass game as well. So we know how much Matt, expects of his running backs and will ask a lot of Josh. I imagine more than the Raiders did, which I feel like the player that we are getting wants that.
Yes.
If you listen to any of his grievances over the past few years, I think he wanted a bigger role. He wanted to take on more. Well, guess what? 8, you are going to get more. But you can always tell when Matt LaFleur is extra excited about a player by the way that he lights up when he speaks about them.
Mhm.
So I think we should expect a very big role for him in the offense.
Yeah, and I mean, that was, I think, the craziest stat to me when I was looking him up more as he was coming to Green Bay, and it was the fact that he doesn't have a receiving touchdown in his entire career, and I'm pretty sure that he's going to hit the over on that this season, just with the way that Matt LaFleur likes to utilize him, and I think the rapport he can build right away with Jordan Love, because we saw that he was really comfortable throwing to his backs last season. So let's segue then and start talking about the first round. We've been promising draft content for weeks, and then we talk about other things, which is fair, right? We still have a month, just about actually a month, a little under now at this point, technically, but until the draft. And I'm curious your thoughts on what's going to happen in the first round. We always try to predict this, we always get it wrong, but the Packers are sitting at pick 25, and they've got a lot of ammunition to move up. They could get into like the early teens if they want to really bundle quite a few picks, or there's always the possibility that they trade back, right? Because 25 is kind of enticing if you're thinking about a quarterback falling or somebody that you want to have that 5th year option on. The Packers could trade back to like 33 and give, have some more ammo on day 2 then. So like initially, before we talk about, I guess, positions and prospects, what do you just think the Packers are going to do this round? Good luck.
I'm going to take a cop-out answer and say it's probably going to depend on how the board falls. I'm curious, who they covet, what they're looking for in the first round, right? I think we can all safely assume it's going to be, look, if one of the top offensive tackles is still on the board in the teens, maybe. It's not something that the Packers have done historically, taking a tackle or just an offensive lineman this early. They usually take them later in the draft, but this year is special. This year is different. And also the Packers no longer have their all-pro left tackle. So if they're looking to, re-up on high-end talent, this could be a really, really good year to do it. I think they're still going to lead the draft with multiple offensive linemen. You mentioned cornerback. There are a number of really, really great cornerbacks that are going to go in the first round. Again, does the run on cornerback start early? Does it start later? Could they get who they want at 25 and not have to move? It's just going to depend on the day. I don't see them taking edge or DL early just because they did it. But also, Brian surprises us all the time. So that is my cop-out answer of, I think it's going to depend. I think this draft, when and where the quarterbacks get taken, is going to monumentally change the entire first day. So while we think we have, the order set, nothing ever stays the same. Yeah. So that's how I feel. But in my opinion, given how much ammunition they have, I don't see them using all their picks on 11 players. They have 11 picks, 11 players. That's a lot. I don't even think they have the roster or cap space to roster up 11 players. So there will be moving around and there will be packaging. I just don't know if it'll be day one.
Yeah, I think that how the board falls is really going to be the telltale sign, as it is every year. And I think it also depends. Like you said, if there's a run on quarterbacks, there potentially will be a run on tackles. And I think there's certain teams that we have in our minds penciled in taking a certain position. Like obviously the theory here is that the Vikings are trying to trade up to get a quarterback. If they trade up and because they wanted like an all pro left tackle potential, that will skew things too. So it'll really depend on if the teams that we think are eyeing certain positions actually take those positions, because there's always a couple shockers every single season. But I guess then let's pivot and talk about some potential players. And maybe let's start with offensive line, because this one is really tricky to me. I know a lot of mock drafts, almost every mock draft that I've seen recently has had the Packers taking a tackle. And
Hmm.
I'm kind of at this point of the mindset that if the Packers take an offensive lineman in the first round, it'll be someone that they want to play in the interior,
Hmm.
like a center or guard. And I know Graham Barton's a name that people like. Um, there's a lot of really good ones actually in this draft, surprisingly. But it just feels so rich for the Packers in the first round to invest in the interior of the offensive line. But I think when you don't have that many holes on your roster, it's a luxury that you have.
Yeah, except that that's not really a Packers move, is it? Like
Right.
they will instead draft the best player on their board, regardless of if it's a need, and say, we're developing for the future, right? I think if the best player that's left on the board, if they're choosing between, I don't know, their fourth ranked offensive tackle and their second ranked edge, they're going to take the edge
Right.
rusher and say, we're just going to develop them behind our top three guys, right? That's the Packer way. They're always thinking about the future. So while I agree with you, I think in this particular draft, given how loaded they are on the line, it could be that their best ranked player in round one is is a lineman, and the Packers really only take tackles and then place them where they need them to be, whether that's the interior or center or at tackle. Um, they might do that, but I can just see them again, depending on how the board falls, being like, we had somebody else ranked higher. It wasn't maybe necessarily a need, but we're gonna go with it, like let's say like Byron Murphy is there. Do they need another interior defensive lineman? We just had a show where we felt like the defensive line is stacked. It has guys at all levels, rotational, etc. um, we would maybe say no, but maybe Byron Murphy is the guy that they have the highest ranked by the time we get to 25, and they just choose someone to develop him behind who they have now.
Yeah. I I don't know. I think it's not, or I don't think fans would like it, but I really feel like it could be edge. I talked about this on Pack a Day earlier this week with Andrew and Kyle, and we talked about players that we think might fall a little bit, that might be a surprise on draft night. And Kyle actually said Byron Murphy, which is funny that you mentioned him.
I Because he's such a Packer player.
And I listed Laiatu Latu, the edge out of UCLA. And I think he might be a red flag for the Packers because they're always so adverse to injury history. Like they don't take flyers on guys like that. But if he was there at 25, I would be like elbowing people out of the way to run that card up and bring him to Green Bay, because edge is just always that like blue collar, blue chip player that Goody covets. And that's why as much as we talk about finding like those gritty offensive linemen, I know Packers fans like really, really love Jackson Powers Johnson, the center. Amarius Mims is a name that's been mocked to the Packers a lot, the
Mhm.
tackle out of Georgia. Like there's some dogs that they could get on the offensive line, but if there's like an edge rusher there that the Packers really like, or if like weirdly Cooper DeJean falls as like a versatile secondary piece, like there's certain players that Goody just probably has on a pedestal right now that he thinks are not going to get to 25.
Yeah, I mean, right now Terry and Arnold is listed at 25 on the draft network, which I think all of us would say, no way, he's still there
Mhm.
at 25, right? But if he is, take him all day, figure it out later.
Mhm.
I want your thoughts on offensive positions, not offensive linemen,
Okay.
because this draft is stacked with wide receivers. And we have spoken ad nauseum about how the Packers have a plethora of riches currently within that room. But let's say there's a run on quarterbacks, there's a run on offensive linemen, there's a run on corners. There's some really great corners that are going to go in the first round. Somehow, a few wide receivers fall. This is a very non Packers thing to do.
Very.
Very. But they've surprised us before. Maybe not the first round, maybe the second round too, but just in general, I want your thoughts on the Packers investing early, top 50, 60 pick on a wide receiver in this draft.
I think it's plausible. I really do. I think there's a world where the Packers take another wide receiver in the second round. And I think there's a world where they take a wide receiver before they prioritize a running back. And I think a lot of that has to do with depth and the kind of like, we'll figure it out. It's like you said, if you have an abundance of riches, then you figure it out. There's 4 receivers on this roster that are locked in, and it's
Mm-hmm.
Watson, Dobbs, Reed, and Wicks.
Mm-hmm.
You always carry at least 5, if not 6 receivers. So as much as we as Packer fans love guys like Bo Melton, I think if you are investing in a second round prospect who moves the needle and is a different chess piece from Matt LaFleur that he doesn't currently have on the roster in one of his big 4, like I could absolutely see them pulling the trigger because I think they know it's hard to bank on all of your guys being healthy. And it sounds like Christian Watson, that was another talking point, went down to Madison, which was really cool, and got like full lab work done. And they think they have some really good ideas on how to keep him healthy. But this is the NFL, right? Like it's very hard for any position to play a full 17 games. So I really do think, yeah, there's a world where like second round, early third, Packer fans are like, what the heck? And it's a wide receiver.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I'm just a big proponent of like take the best player available
Oh yeah.
and keep investing, especially like with the way that the offensive side of the ball is shaping up for the Packers. You're trying to put as many pieces around Jordan Love as humanly possible. We said it at the top of the show, the Packers have already begun discussions to give him, the massive contract extension that we all expect him to have. The Packers organization has their most important player and position locked up. Now it's about building around him. And if that means taking as many offensive skill positions as possible with the capital that they have, do it. I always think about how the Packers took Randall Cobb
I was just gonna mention that. Yep.
the year
Mhm.
after they won the Super Bowl. With that, you think about the Sports Illustrated cover of all those players around Aaron Rodgers and how they have like, that the incredible like wide receiver core, and then they went and added yet another player who added an incredible dimension to the offense that they didn't have before. And Cobb, obviously, we all know, ended up being one of the most beloved and like long-term players that this team has seen in the last like decade and a half. So you keep adding when you need to. What about other positions?
I've been like toying with that, right? Like I'm sitting here and I'm like, what if Brock Bowers falls to 25? Like, what do you do? And I don't think Goot pulls the trigger on a tight end. I don't. I
Yeah.
mean, I think given Musgrave and Kraft, like as fun as that might be, 3 tight ends feels rich. And I think even if he's the best player available on your board, I'm not sure I see Goody taking best player available in that particular instance because if he's sliding, that probably means that like another position is also sliding. Um, let's flip to the defense because I'm curious your thoughts. Like Tyler Nubbin, I think is probably the only safety that potentially could go in the first round, and maybe it's at 25 to Green Bay. Maybe the Packers trade back a little bit into like the
Mhm.
late 20s and grab him. But
Mhm.
this notoriously is not a very strong safety class.
Mhm.
When it was a strong safety class a couple years ago, we were like, oh, there's no way the Packers get out of the first 2 rounds without taking one. And they did. So what do you think, like on the defensive side of the ball, where do you see them grabbing some of these guys? Do you think it's possible that they reach at all, or is that just they're going to stick to their
Packers don't reach. Even when you want them to, they don't reach. Um, they're gonna have to leave this draft with the safety, right? Unequivocally, we can all, I think, agree that that's going to happen. Um, I'm trying to remember how Cameron Kitchens tested because I don't think it was good.
Yeah, I don't think he had a very good performance.
Um,
I don't think he interviewed well either. I think that was part of it.
it's really unfortunate. So that kind of, oh yeah, that's really bad. So that kind of takes him out of the running here, doesn't it? A little bit. See, the thing is for me is like predicting this is near impossible.
Right. That's why
Um,
we do it.
that's why we do it. It's so fun. But the idea that they leave this draft without a single safety is pretty hard to believe.
Yeah.
It's also possible that they have some cornerbacks in mind who can play maybe more of a hybrid role. Um, that's my only other thought about it. Or an inside linebacker that they think can play more of that like box safety role. That hasn't always worked out when they've tried to move players around in that way. So I don't feel super confident in it. But unlike previous years where they've tried to do it, they have their core guy at the moment, right? They have their strong safety, single high coverage man. So, same idea, I think, with what I was saying before about Jordan Love being that like core centerpiece. Like Xavier McKinney is now like the core centerpiece of the safety group. Um, and now you just need to fill in, I think, where his skill sets are lacking and get him a running mate. And that makes their job a little bit easier in this draft because you don't have to get like the guy. There isn't the guy in this draft.
There's not a Xavier McKinney in this draft that we know of.
No, there's not. Not even close. So, but it does make choices. It gives them flexibility in their choices to leave with someone that they think could pair well with him, right? That's totally different.
And I think that's kind of like going back to like the Brian Gutekunst is a liar kind of comments, right? Like don't take everything he says as face value. That was a shout out to Peter Bukowski, who said he wanted to open his Lockdown Packers today by saying that and didn't want to get sued. But yeah, I mean, he talked right about how valuable Keyshawn Nixon is, and he is, and they think that he can be their starting nickel. And they said that Jeff Hafley really was impressed with what he saw on tape and liked the idea of Nixon there. And I think that those are all good points. And I think that that is true. And I think he can play nickel. And I think if the Packers went into the season with Keyshawn Nixon as their starting nickel, they would do well. But I don't think that is going to limit them from bringing in competition. I know I said Cooper DeJean already, but he's been like weirdly sliding in a lot of mocks that I've seen, and he can play anywhere. And there's a lot of really good nickel corners in this draft. I keep teasing Jerry and Jones as one of the guys I really like in like a day 3 kind of realm. So, yeah, I think that doesn't inhibit anything either. I think the Packers are just going to look for really good football players in the secondary, and they have the pieces at this point to be able to move them around. And even if they're really, really high on Anthony Johnson Jr., like that's not going to stop them from taking an additional safety or two. They're probably going to take multiple, but having the versatility that they have now, knowing they have Nixon there, knowing they had a really good year out of Valentine, knowing that Jair is going to be back full strength, like a
Mhm.
lot of their needs really aren't needs.
Yeah. Okay, my last question. I know we've been talking about the defense, but I can't get it out of my head that I think the Packers are going to draft a quarterback.
Yeah.
And I don't know why. I just feel like it's going to be like higher than we think it's going to
It's going to be JJ McCarthy. They're going to
No,
trade
no,
up.
no.
Just
No,
kidding.
but like
No.
what if like Bo Nix is available in like round 4? Like how do we feel about that?
I mean, I don't think Packer like I think the important thing here, and I say this talking to the internet, is to not overreact to anything that
Yeah.
happens.
No,
Yeah,
obviously.
but like I can see a world where they do that because we've
Yeah.
seen what happens when you don't have a good backup quarterback or like reliability. And the Packers are always looking to draft players. Brian said they want to get back to that. They really like Sean Clifford. That's great. They always want to bring in competition, even though they really like him. So I don't know if I think it'll happen day 3, obviously, but there will absolutely be a quarterback drafted, and they then will have a fun roster competition, I guess, in training camp behind Jordan Love.
I just think it would be fun. And I also think like you also have to think of each player as an investment,
Mhm.
right? Like just because the Packers bring in somebody doesn't mean they're necessarily going to start or play for the Packers. You bring them
Right.
in, you continue to develop them, you keep them in that room, and then somebody else says, well, they've been in the Packers quarterback room. I want them now. And they trade for them or they acquire them in some capacity, and the Packers get something out of that. So I don't know. I'm starting to, after the last few drafts, put pretty blind faith in Brian and
I think
the
he's earned
scout team and the Packers front office in their drafting abilities because they've done a pretty damn good job turning this roster over in a very short amount of time to going from Aaron Rodgers Super Bowl window to a Jordan Love Super Bowl window in like legitimately one season. So they're looking to add pieces this year that are going to bolster them. I think we have some pretty obvious needs: safety, inside linebacker, running back, offensive lineman. And they will address them in whatever form or fashion that happens.
Yeah, and, like, to your point before we wrap this up too about quarterbacks, how many frickin' backup quarterbacks started at least a game in 2023? Like, it was insane, and I think a
Yeah.
really good example of this, and it could be recency bias, is Brock Purdy being literally Mr. Irrelevant as the last
Yeah.
selection in the draft and leading that team to a Super Bowl. Like, however you find them, it's hard for quarterbacks to play all 17 games. Just like we said, it was hard for wide receivers for any position to get through a full season. And that's not like predicting the worst for Jordan, but those things happen. Like Tyler Huntley, I think about with the Ravens, how he's stepped in multiple seasons to fill in for Lamar because Lamar would get banged up for a couple games. Like these are the things that happen. And it's better to trust the guy you've got back there. And if the Packers think that's Sean Clifford, that's great. But there is a chance that you see Sean Clifford in a game in
Yeah.
2024, right? So like there's always that possibility. So it makes sense to always be developing the next guy because it's like you said, whether he plays for the Packers or not, look at Matt Flynn going to Seattle and then they draft Russell Wilson and he doesn't get to start. But like the Packers know how to develop quarterbacks. And I think that also makes them desirable for other franchises that are looking to find the diamond in the rough kind of players.
Exactly.
So, any final thoughts on the first round, big surprises, what wouldn't surprise you at all before we wrap this up? Because, of course, we'll be diving into this in a lot more detail in the coming
Yeah.
weeks.
I mean, honestly, at this point, like nothing the Packers do surprises me. So I'm just going to go in and enjoy it and see who is going to be the new player on our team that we are going to be rooting for.
That's the way to do it. I decided I'm not going to have a draft crush anymore because I don't like it when they they historically go to the Bears. So I'm just not going to do it anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm sure on draft night I will have a list of favorites that I'm hoping end up in green and gold because that's just fun. But thank you, as always, for listening to the show. That's going to do it for us this week. As always, please like and subscribe on YouTube if you're watching in the video format. If you're in the audio format, please make sure you're downloading the show. We appreciate that as well. And you can also be a friend, tell a friend, right? We were talking to our producers at Odyssey, and they said that is such a great way to help us boost our listeners. So if you would like to tell your friends about Pax What She Said, we would appreciate it because the more listeners, we want to share our love of football with everyone. And if you want to tell your friends about that, like the Packers, about Pax What She Said, then go ahead and do it. I was going to say you don't have to be a Packer fan, but that's a Tom Grossi thing, so I don't want to steal that from him. But thank you, as always, for listening to the show. We'll be back next week to talk about more draft content. And go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.